Marcus Wellington had not seen his home in 3 long years. The private jet touched down on the runway of his coastal city, and he felt something heavy in his chest. It was not excitement. It was not joy. It was something darker, something he could not name. He had left this place as a broken man, running away from the pain of losing his wife during childbirth. Now he was returning as one of the most powerful businessmen in the world, but the emptiness inside him had never gone away. The driver was waiting for him at the airport. Marcus climbed into the back of the black luxury car and stared out the window as the familiar streets passed by. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. 3 years ago, he had been too destroyed to even look at his newborn twins. The sight of them reminded him of Sarah, his beautiful wife who had died bringing them into this world. He had handed them over to his younger brother Victor and his wife Diane, asking them to care for the children until he could find the strength to return. Now, Marcus was back. He had built an empire overseas. His face was on magazine covers. His name was spoken in boardrooms across the globe. But none of that mattered to him anymore. He had realized, somewhere in the lonely nights in foreign hotel rooms, that money meant nothing without family. His children were now 3 years old, and he had missed everything. Their first words, their first steps, their first birthdays. The guilt had been eating him alive for months, and he could not run from it any longer. The car pulled up to the massive iron gates of the Wellington estate. This was the house where Marcus had grown up, where he had brought Sarah as his bride, where he had dreamed of raising a family. After Sarah died, he could not bear to stay here, so he had given Victor and Diane permission to move in and care for the twins. He had sent money every month, more than enough to ensure his children would have everything they needed. Victor had always assured him on their occasional phone calls that the twins were happy and healthy, that they were being treated like royalty. Marcus stepped out of the car and looked up at the grand mansion. The gardens were well kept. The windows sparkled in the afternoon sun. Everything looked perfect on the outside. But as he walked toward the front door, a strange feeling crept over him. Something was not right. He could feel it in his bones, though he did not know what it was. The front door opened before he could knock, and there stood Victor. His younger brother had changed in 3 years. He was heavier now, his face fuller, his eyes carrying a sharpness that Marcus did not remember. Victor smiled widely and pulled Marcus into a hug. "Brother, welcome home," Victor said loudly. "We have been waiting for you." Marcus returned the embrace, but he noticed that Victor's body was stiff. There was something forced about his warmth, something that did not feel genuine. Marcus pushed the thought aside. He was being paranoid. Victor was his brother, his own blood. There was no reason to doubt him. Diane appeared behind Victor, dressed in expensive clothes and jewelry that Marcus did not remember her owning. She had always been a simple woman when Victor married her 5 years ago. Now she looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine. Her smile was bright, but her eyes did not match it. "Marcus, darling, it is so wonderful to have you back," Diane said, kissing both his cheeks. "The children will be so happy to meet their father." Marcus felt his heart jump at the mention of his children. "Where are they? Where are my twins?" Victor and Diane exchanged a quick look. It was so fast that most people would have missed it, but Marcus had spent years reading people in business negotiations. He saw it clearly. It was a look of worry, maybe even fear. "They are upstairs, playing in the nursery," Diane said smoothly. "Let us get you settled first. You must be tired from your journey. We can have dinner together, and then you can see the children." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I want to see them now. I have waited 3 years. I am not waiting another minute." Victor laughed nervously. Of course. Diane, why do you not take Marcus up to see the children? I will have the staff prepare his room." Marcus followed Diane up the grand staircase, his eyes taking in every detail of the house he once knew so well. The paintings on the walls were new. The furniture was different. Expensive things were everywhere, things that must have cost a fortune. Marcus wondered where all this money had come from. He had sent enough for the children and basic living expenses, but not for this level of luxury. They reached the second floor, and Diane led him down a long hallway. Marcus remembered this hallway. The master bedroom was at the end, the room he had shared with Sarah. The nursery was supposed to be the room next to it, the room they had decorated together before the babies came. But Diane did not stop at the nursery door. She walked past it, past the master bedroom, and kept going until they reached a door at the very end of the hall. This was the old storage room, a small space that had always been used for keeping old furniture and boxes. "Why are we here?" Marcus asked, confusion in his voice. Diane's face flickered with something Marcus could not read. "The children like this room. It is quieter here, away from all the noise." She opened the door and Marcus stepped inside. The room was small and dark. The single window had a curtain pulled over it, blocking out most of the sunlight. There was an old carpet on the floor, a small table in the corner, and two tiny beds pushed against the wall. The beds had thin blankets and flat pillows. There were no toys, no books, no colorful decorations that children usually had. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. This was not a nursery. This was barely a room at all. It looked more like a prison cell than a place for children to live. "Where are my children?" he demanded, his voice rising. Before Diane could answer, Marcus heard something. It was coming from below them, from somewhere beneath the floor. It was a sound that made his heart stop. It was the sound of a child crying. Marcus pushed past Diane and ran out of the room. He searched for the source of the sound, his ears guiding him down the hallway and to a narrow staircase that led to the basement. He had forgotten about this staircase. It was hidden behind a door that was always kept locked when he was young, but now the door was open, and the crying was getting louder. Marcus flew down the stairs, taking them two at a time. The basement was cold and damp, lit only by a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. And there, in the corner of the basement, he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His twins, a boy and a girl, were huddled on a dirty mattress on the floor. They were thin, too thin for 3-year-olds. Their clothes were old and torn. Their faces were streaked with tears and dirt. They looked up at Marcus with wide, terrified eyes, and he could see that they did not recognize him. How could they? He had never been in their lives, but that was not the worst part. Next to the mattress, sitting with her back against the cold stone wall, was a black woman. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, and she wore a plain dress that was worn and faded. Her hair was pulled back, and her face showed exhaustion and suffering. Around her wrist was a metal chain attached to a heavy bracket on the wall. She was restrained like an animal, unable to move more than a few feet in any direction. The woman looked up at Marcus, and in her eyes, he saw a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The twins were clinging to her, their small hands gripping her dress, as if she was the only safety they knew. Marcus could not breathe. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His children, the heirs to his billion-dollar empire, were living in a basement like prisoners, and a woman was chained to the wall beside them. "What is this?" Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. The woman spoke, her voice weak but clear. "My name is Grace. I was hired as the children's nanny 3 years ago, right after you left. For the first few months, everything was normal. But then your brother and his wife changed. They moved the children to the small room upstairs, then to this basement. They started treating them worse and worse. I tried to stop them. I tried to protect your children. And when I threatened to call the police, they chained me down here." Marcus felt the room spinning around him. This could not be real. This had to be a nightmare. "I have been down here for 2 years," Grace continued, her voice trembling. "I have done everything I can to keep your children safe, to give them what little love and care I could. But I could not save them from this place. I could only stay with them so they would not be completely alone." Marcus fell to his knees. The tears came before he could stop them. His children, his beautiful twins, had been suffering in this basement while he was building his empire. They had been abused and neglected, treated like garbage by the very people he had trusted to care for them. And this woman, this brave woman named Grace, had sacrificed her freedom to stay with them, to give them whatever comfort she could. The little girl, his daughter, looked at Marcus with those big eyes that reminded him so much of Sarah. She was clutching a piece of cloth, something that might have once been a toy, but was now just a rag. She did not come to him, did not reach out for him. She did not know him at all. "Daddy?" the little boy said suddenly, his voice small and unsure. Marcus looked at his son, shocked. "You know who I am?" The boy nodded slowly. "Grace told us about you. She said our daddy went away because he was sad, but he would come back one day to save us." Marcus turned to Grace, unable to speak through his tears. This woman had kept his memory alive for his children, even when she was chained to a wall, even when she had every reason to give up hope. "Why?" Marcus managed to ask. "Why did you stay? Why did you protect them?" Grace looked at the twins with a tenderness that broke Marcus's heart. "Because these children are innocent. They did not choose to be born into this situation. They deserve love and protection, and I could not abandon them, no matter what happened to me." Behind Marcus, footsteps echoed on the basement stairs. He turned to see Victor and Diane standing there, their faces twisted with anger and fear. "Marcus, you do not understand," Victor started, his voice desperate. "This is not what it looks like. The nanny, she was stealing from us, she was dangerous. We had to restrain her for everyone's safety. And the children, they misbehave. They need strict discipline." Marcus rose to his feet, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to want to hurt someone. The rage inside him was burning like fire, spreading through every part of his body. He looked at his brother, the man he had trusted with everything, and saw a monster. "Discipline?" Marcus repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "You call this discipline? My children are living in a basement. They are starving. They are terrified, and you have had an innocent woman chained to a wall for 2 years. Diane stepped forward, trying to smile. "Marcus, darling, please listen. We did what was best. Those children are difficult, and the nanny was filling their heads with lies. We were protecting them from her influence." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the sound of a man who had just discovered that his entire world was built on lies. "Protecting them? Look at them. Look at their faces, look at their bodies. They are skin and bones. They are traumatized. They have been living in fear under my own roof, and you call that protection?" Victor's expression changed. The mask of concern fell away, and underneath was something cold and calculating. "Fine, brother. You want the truth? Here is the truth. You abandoned those children. You ran away because you were too weak to face your own responsibilities. Someone had to take care of them, and that someone was us. Do you know how expensive it is to maintain this house? Do you know how much work it takes? And all you sent was money for the children. What about us? What about our sacrifices?" Marcus stared at his brother in disbelief. "You took the money I sent for my children. You spent it on yourself. And you punished them for existing." Diane grabbed Victor's arm, her eyes darting toward the stairs. "We should leave. We should get out of here before he does something stupid." But Marcus was faster. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Within seconds, he was speaking to someone, his voice cold and clear. "I need police at the Wellington estate immediately. I am reporting kidnapping, child abuse, and false imprisonment. And bring medical services. There are children who need immediate care." Victor's face went pale. "You cannot do this. I am your brother. We are family." Marcus walked over to Grace and knelt down beside her. He examined the chain around her wrist, his hands shaking with anger. "I will get you out of this. I promise you. I will get all of you out of this." Grace looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "You came back. I always told the children you would come back." The little girl finally moved. She crawled across the mattress and touched Marcus's hand with her tiny fingers. Her touch was gentle, curious, like a small animal approaching something unknown. Marcus held his breath, not wanting to scare her. "Are you really our daddy?" she asked. Marcus nodded, the tears flowing freely now. "Yes, baby. I am your daddy, and I am so sorry. I am so sorry I was not here. But I am here now, and I will never leave you again." The boy joined his sister, and soon both children were in Marcus's arms. They were so small, so fragile. He could feel their bones through their thin clothes. He held them gently, afraid that if he squeezed too hard, they might break. The sound of sirens filled the air. Help was coming. But Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. His children were traumatized. They had been through horrors that no child should ever experience. And the woman who had protected them, who had given up her freedom to keep them safe, was still chained to a wall. Marcus made a silent promise in that cold basement. He would spend the rest of his life making this right. He would give his children every ounce of love they had missed. And he would repay Grace for her sacrifice in every way he could. The police burst through the front door above them. Victor and Diane tried to run, but they did not get far. Marcus heard the sounds of struggle, of shouting, of handcuffs clicking shut. Justice was coming for those who had hurt his children. But as Marcus sat in that basement, holding his twins for the first time, he knew that justice alone would not be enough. The damage had been done. The scars, both visible and invisible, would take years to heal. All he could do now was be there for his children, to show them day by day that they were loved, that they were safe, that they would never be hurt again. Grace watched him with those tired, knowing eyes. She had seen so much suffering in this house, had endured so much pain herself, and yet she had never given up. She had kept hope alive for two children who had no one else in the world. Marcus reached out and took her hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saving my children." Grace squeezed his hand weakly. "They saved me too. They gave me a reason to keep going." The paramedics came down the stairs, their faces showing shock at what they found. They began to work immediately, checking the children, examining Grace, preparing to transport them to the hospital. Marcus refused to leave their side. He had missed 3 years of their lives. He would not miss another second. As they were loaded into ambulances, Marcus looked back at the mansion that had once been his home. It no longer felt like a place of happy memories. It felt like a tomb, a place where innocence had been murdered and love had been betrayed. He knew he would never step foot in that house again. Victor and Diane were being led to police cars, their hands cuffed behind their backs. Victor was screaming about lawyers and rights, about how Marcus would regret this. Diane was crying, insisting that she had done nothing wrong, that it was all Victor's idea. Marcus did not look at them. They were dead to him now. Whatever bond they had shared as family had been destroyed by their cruelty. He climbed into the ambulance with his children and Grace, and as the doors closed, he finally allowed himself to breathe. The hardest part was over. He had found his children. He had discovered the truth. But now came the even harder work of rebuilding, of healing, of learning how to be the father his children deserved. Marcus did not know if he was strong enough for what lay ahead. But he knew he had to try, for his children, for Grace, for the memory of Sarah, who had given her life to bring these beautiful twins into the world. The ambulance pulled away from the Wellington estate, carrying Marcus toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt something that had been missing from his life. He felt hope. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines. Marcus sat in a chair between 2 small beds, watching his children sleep. The doctors had examined them thoroughly, and the results had been devastating. The twins were severely malnourished. They showed signs of long-term neglect. The little girl, whose name Marcus had learned was Lily, had scars on her arms from being grabbed too roughly. The little boy, named Lucas, had a healed fracture in his arm that had never been properly treated. Marcus had chosen those names. Before Sarah died, they had spent hours discussing what to call their babies. Sarah had wanted Lily for the girl after her grandmother. Marcus had suggested Lucas for the boy, a name that meant light. He wondered if Victor and Diane had even used their real names, or if the children had been called something else entirely. The door to the room opened softly, and a nurse entered. She checked the monitors, adjusted the blankets over the sleeping children, and gave Marcus a gentle smile. "They are strong," she said quietly. "Whatever they went through, they survived. That takes incredible strength." Marcus nodded but could not speak. Every time he tried to process what had happened, his mind shut down. The thought of what his children had endured was too much to bear. "The woman who was brought in with them," Marcus said finally. "Grace. How is she?" The nurse's expression grew more serious. "She is in stable condition. She was dehydrated and malnourished, and there was damage to her wrist from the chain. But physically she will recover. Mentally and emotionally, that is a different matter." Marcus closed his eyes. Grace had been chained in that basement for 2 years. 2 years of darkness and cold, of watching children suffer and being unable to fully protect them. The psychological damage from that kind of trauma was something that might never fully heal. "I want to see her," Marcus said. "When she is ready for visitors, please let me know." The nurse nodded and left the room. Marcus returned his attention to his children, studying their faces as they slept. Lily looked like Sarah. She had the same delicate features, the same curve of her lips, the same way her eyelashes rested against her cheeks. Lucas looked more like Marcus, with a stronger jaw and darker hair. They were both beautiful, even with the marks of suffering on their bodies. Hours passed. Marcus dozed in the chair, unable to leave his children even for a moment. When morning came, a soft knock on the door woke him. He opened his eyes to see a woman in professional attire standing in the doorway. She introduced herself as Dr. Rebecca Chen, a child psychologist who had been assigned to the case. "Mr. Wellington, may I speak with you privately?" she asked. Marcus looked at his sleeping children, then reluctantly followed her into the hallway. They walked to a small conference room where Dr. Chen closed the door and took a seat across from him. "I have done a preliminary evaluation of your children," she began, her voice calm and professional. "What I am about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but it is important that you understand the full scope of what we are dealing with." Marcus braced himself. "Tell me." Dr. Chen folded her hands on the table. "Lily and Lucas have experienced severe trauma over an extended period. They show signs of attachment disorder, which is common in children who have been neglected. They do not trust adults easily. They have learned that the people who should protect them are instead sources of pain and fear." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "But they came to me. In the basement, they came to me." "That is encouraging," Dr. Chen agreed. "But it does not mean they trust you fully. They may have responded to the emotional intensity of the moment, or they may have been following the guidance of Grace, who they clearly do trust. Building a genuine bond with them will take time, patience, and consistency. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. There is something else you should know. From what I can gather, Grace was the primary caregiver for these children, even while she was restrained. She fed them, comforted them, taught them basic things like colors and numbers. She told them stories about their parents, particularly about you. She created a narrative that their father was a good man who would one day return to save them. That narrative may have been the only thing that kept these children hopeful. Marcus put his head in his hands. She was chained to a wall, and she still found ways to take care of them. Grace is an extraordinary woman, Dr. Chen said softly. Her actions likely saved your children from even greater psychological damage. Without her presence, without her love and care, I shudder to think what state they would be in now. The conversation continued for another hour. Dr. Chen explained the treatment plan, the therapy sessions, the gradual process of rebuilding trust and helping the children heal. It would not be quick or easy. There would be setbacks and challenges. But with dedication and professional support, there was hope for recovery. After the meeting, Marcus walked through the hospital until he found Grace's room. She was awake, sitting up in bed and staring out the window. The chain was gone from her wrist, replaced by bandages. She looked fragile in the hospital gown, but when she turned to see Marcus, there was still that spark of strength in her eyes. "May I come in?" Marcus asked from the doorway. Grace nodded and he entered, taking a seat in the chair beside her bed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of everything that had happened hung between them like a physical presence. "The children are going to be okay," Marcus finally said. "Because of you. The doctors told me that without you they might not have survived." Grace shook her head slowly. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Marcus said firmly. "You did what no one else did. You could have escaped. You could have found a way to save yourself and leave the children behind, but you stayed. You let them chain you up so you could remain close to Lily and Lucas. That is not what anyone would do. That is what a hero does." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. "They were innocent. They had no one else. How could I leave them?" Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He had been making calls all morning, between meetings with doctors and lawyers and police. He had set plans in motion that he hoped would begin to repay Grace for everything she had sacrificed. "I have spoken with my lawyers," Marcus said. "Victor and Diane are being charged with kidnapping, child abuse, false imprisonment, and fraud. They stole hundreds of thousands of dollars that was meant for my children. They used that money to live a life of luxury while my children starved in a basement. They will never see the outside of a prison again." Grace listened quietly, her expression unreadable. "I have also set up a trust fund in your name," Marcus continued. "You will never have to worry about money again. You can do whatever you want with your life. Go back to school, start a business, travel the world. Whatever you want, it is yours." Grace looked at him with surprise. "You do not owe me money." "I owe you everything," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "You saved my children. You gave up 2 years of your life to protect them. There is no amount of money that can repay that debt. But I am going to try anyway." Grace was silent for a long time, processing his words. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not want to travel the world. I do not want to start a business. There is only one thing I want." "Name it," Marcus said immediately. "Whatever it is. I will make it happen." Grace turned to look at him directly, her eyes searching his face. "I want to stay with the children. I know I am nobody to them legally. I know you are their father, and you have every right to take them away and start fresh. But those babies are my family. They are the only family I have. I cannot imagine my life without them in it." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had not even known he was carrying. He had been terrified of this moment, terrified that Grace would want nothing more to do with the children or with him, that she would take the money and disappear to heal her wounds far away from the memories of that basement.
"Grace,"
he said carefully,
"I was hoping you would say that. The truth is, my children do not know me. They have spent their entire lives with you."
"You are their mother in every way that matters. The last thing I want to do is tear them away from the one person who has shown them unconditional love." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I am asking you to stay. Not as a nanny, not as an employee, as family. I want to hire the best therapists, the best doctors, the best educators for Lily and Lucas. I want to give them everything they have been denied. But none of that matters if they do not have the love and stability that you provide. Please, Grace, stay with us." The tears finally fell from Grace's eyes, streaming down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak through her emotion. Marcus took her hand gently, mindful of her injured wrist, and held it. "We will do this together," he promised. "We will heal together." Over the following weeks, the small family began to find its rhythm. Marcus rented a comfortable house near the hospital so the children could attend their therapy sessions easily. It was nothing like the grand Wellington estate, and that was exactly what Marcus wanted. He wanted a fresh start, a home without painful memories, a place where his children could feel safe. Grace moved in with them, taking the bedroom next to the children's room. At first, Lily and Lucas were confused by the changes. They did not understand why they were no longer in the basement, why there was so much food, why people kept being nice to them. They clung to Grace constantly, afraid to let her out of their sight. Slowly, day by day, they began to open up to Marcus. It started with small things. Lucas would show Marcus a drawing he had made. Lily would let Marcus help her with her shoes. They began to accept his presence, to recognize him as someone who was there to help, not to hurt. The therapy sessions were difficult for everyone. The children had to confront memories they had tried to forget. Grace had to process her own trauma while still being strong for the little ones. And Marcus had to face the guilt that threatened to consume him every day. He should have been there. He should have known. He should have protected his children. Dr. Chen reminded him constantly that guilt would not help anyone. What mattered now was what he did going forward, not what he had failed to do in the past. Marcus tried to believe her, but some nights he lay awake for hours, tormented by thoughts of what might have been. The media caught wind of the story, as Marcus had known they would. A billionaire's children abused by his own brother made for sensational headlines. Reporters camped outside their rented house. Talk shows begged for interviews. Social media exploded with opinions and judgments. Marcus hired a team to manage the publicity and protect his family's privacy. He released a single statement thanking the police and medical professionals who had helped rescue his children and asking for space to heal. He refused all interview requests and threatened legal action against anyone who photographed his children or Grace without permission. The trial of Victor and Diane became a national spectacle. The prosecution presented evidence of the years of abuse and fraud. Photos of the basement were shown in court, along with medical records documenting the children's injuries and malnutrition. Grace testified, her voice steady and strong as she described what she had witnessed and endured. Marcus testified as well. He spoke about his decision to leave his children in Victor's care, about his grief over Sarah's death, about the guilt he carried for not checking on his children more carefully. He did not try to excuse his own failures. He owned them completely. The defense tried to paint Victor and Diane as overwhelmed caregivers who had made mistakes under pressure. They argued that the children were difficult, that Grace was a troublemaker who had been appropriately restrained after threatening the household. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The jury took only 3 hours to reach their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Victor was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Diane received 25. As they were led away in handcuffs, Victor looked at Marcus with pure hatred in his eyes. "You will regret this," Victor hissed. "I am your blood. Family does not betray family." Marcus met his brother's gaze without flinching. "You stopped being my family the moment you hurt my children." After the trial, Marcus focused entirely on his family. He began the process of building a new life, one centered on love and healing rather than money and success. He sold most of his business interests, keeping only enough to ensure his family would always be financially secure. The constant travel, the endless meetings, the pressure of running an empire, none of that mattered anymore. His children needed a present father, not an absent billionaire. He bought a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, far from the city where everything had happened. It had a big backyard where the children could play and a garden where Grace could grow flowers and vegetables. There were good schools nearby, kind neighbors, parks and playgrounds within walking distance. The twins started preschool, and it was terrifying for everyone. Lily cried for the first week, afraid that she would never see Grace or Marcus again. Lucas refused to speak to the teachers or other children, but gradually, with patience and encouragement, they began to adjust. They made friends. They learned to laugh and play like normal children. The shadows in their eyes began to fade. Grace enrolled in community college, something she had always wanted to do but never had the chance. She studied child development and psychology, wanting to understand more about what the twins had been through and how to help them. She was a natural student, intelligent and dedicated, and Marcus was proud to watch her flourish. The relationship between Marcus and Grace deepened over time, though neither of them rushed it. They had both been through too much for impulsive decisions. They spent long evenings talking after the children were asleep, sharing their fears and hopes, getting to know each other as adults rather than just as caretakers of two wounded children. Marcus learned about Grace's background, how she had grown up in poverty but had worked her way through high school with top grades, how she had dreamed of going to college but had to work instead to support her sick mother, how she had taken the nanny job at the Wellington estate because it paid well and seemed like a good opportunity. She had no idea what she was walking into. Grace learned about Marcus, about the man behind the headlines and the fortune. She learned about his love for Sarah, his devastation at her death, his shame at running away from his responsibilities. She saw his determination to be better, to do better, and she believed in him. The children were the center of their world. Every decision was made with Lily and Lucas in mind. Bedtime routines were sacred. Family dinners were mandatory. Weekends were for adventures, whether it was a trip to the zoo or just baking cookies in the kitchen. Marcus created traditions that he hoped would give his children happy memories to replace the dark ones. Sunday morning pancakes, Friday night movie nights, birthday parties with cake and presents and all the joy that they had been denied. Every celebration was a small victory. Another step away from the basement and toward the light. There were still hard days. Lily would sometimes wake screaming from nightmares. Lucas would occasionally retreat into silence, unreachable for hours. Grace had panic attacks when she felt trapped or confined. Marcus struggled with depression and anxiety, the weight of his guilt never fully lifting. But they faced these challenges together, as a family. They went to therapy, both individually and as a group. They talked about their feelings openly and honestly. They learned to be patient with themselves and with each other. And through it all, love grew. It was not the romantic love of fairy tales. It was something deeper and more durable. It was the love of people who had seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. It was the love of survivors who had found hope in each other. Marcus began to understand something he had never known before. Wealth and power meant nothing compared to this. The satisfaction of closing a business deal was empty compared to the joy of hearing his children laugh. The respect of the business world was meaningless compared to the trust of a small hand slipping into his. He had spent 3 years building an empire. Now he was spending every day building something far more valuable, a family. 5 years had passed since that terrible day in the basement. The seasons had changed, birthdays had been celebrated, and the small family had transformed in ways none of them could have predicted. The twins were now 8 years old, bright and curious children who carried only faint echoes of the trauma they had survived. Marcus stood at the kitchen window of their home, watching Lily and Lucas play in the backyard with the family dog, a golden retriever named Sunny that they had adopted 2 years ago. The children were laughing, chasing each other around the oak tree that dominated the yard. They looked happy. They looked normal. They looked like children who had never known darkness. But Marcus knew the truth. The scars were still there, hidden beneath the surface. Lily still slept with a nightlight and checked under her bed every night. Lucas still flinched when anyone raised their voice, even in excitement. They had come so far, but the journey was not over. Perhaps it would never be completely over. Grace appeared beside him holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Marcus and joined him at the window, watching the children play. She had changed over the years, growing stronger and more confident. She had completed her college degree and was now working as a child advocate, helping other abused and neglected children find safety and healing. The work was difficult, but she approached it with the same dedication and love that she had shown Lily and Lucas. "They are getting so big," Grace said softly. "I remember when they could barely reach my knees." Marcus nodded. "Sometimes I look at them and I cannot believe they are the same children I found in that basement. They have overcome so much." Grace turned to him with a knowing smile. "We all have." It was true. The past 5 years had transformed all of them. Marcus was no longer the distant, grief-stricken man who had run away from his responsibilities. He was present, engaged, and devoted to his family. The business world that had once consumed his life now seemed like a distant memory, something from another lifetime. His relationship with Grace had evolved as well. What had started as a partnership born of necessity had become something much deeper. They had dated cautiously for 2 years, careful not to disrupt the stability the children needed. Last year, Marcus had proposed, and Grace had said yes. They had been married in a small ceremony in their backyard, with Lily as the flower girl and Lucas as the ring bearer. It had been the happiest day of Marcus's life. Now Grace was his wife, his partner, the mother of his children in every way that mattered. She had never tried to replace Sarah in his heart, and he loved her for that. Instead, she had carved out her own space, creating a new love that existed alongside his memories of Sarah rather than competing with them. The sound of the doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Marcus went to answer it, finding a young woman in professional attire standing on the porch. "Mr. Wellington? I am Amanda Torres from the district attorney's office. May I come in?" Marcus recognized the name. Amanda was the prosecutor who had handled Victor and Diane's case and had kept in touch over the years. He invited her in, leading her to the living room while Grace called the children inside to wash up for lunch. Amanda sat down, her expression serious. "I wanted to tell you this in person before you heard it from the news. Victor has filed an appeal." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "An appeal? On what grounds?" "He is claiming ineffective counsel and new evidence. His lawyers are arguing that the original trial was flawed and that certain evidence was improperly admitted. They are also claiming that they have witnesses who will testify that the children were treated well and that Grace's testimony was fabricated." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "That is insane. There was physical evidence, medical records, photos of the basement. How can he possibly claim the children were treated well? I know, Amanda said sympathetically, and I want you to know that my office is fighting this appeal with everything we have. The evidence against Victor is overwhelming and his claims are baseless. But I wanted you to be prepared. This is going to bring up a lot of painful memories, and there may be media attention again. After Amanda left, Marcus sat in silence, trying to process what he had heard. He had believed this chapter of their lives was closed, that Victor would rot in prison and never threaten his family again. The thought of reopening all those wounds, of putting the children through another trial, was unbearable. Grace found him still sitting in the living room an hour later, staring at nothing. She sat beside him and took his hand. "I heard," she said quietly. "Amanda told me on her way out." "What are we going to do?" Marcus asked. "The kids have finally found peace. I cannot drag them through this again." Grace squeezed his hand firmly. "We do what we have always done. We face it together. We protect our children. And we trust that justice will prevail." Over the following weeks, the appeal process moved forward. Marcus hired additional lawyers, determined to ensure that Victor's attempt to rewrite history would fail. He also increased security around their home, worried that the renewed attention might attract unwanted visitors. The children noticed the tension in the house, even though Marcus and Grace tried to shield them. Lily asked why Daddy seemed so worried all the time. Lucas wondered why there was a strange car parked outside their house. Marcus and Grace decided to have an honest conversation with the children, age-appropriate but truthful. They sat down together as a family, and Marcus explained that Uncle Victor, who had hurt them when they were little, was trying to get out of prison. He assured them that the bad man would not succeed, that he would never be allowed to hurt them again. He promised that no matter what happened, their family would stay together and stay safe. Lily listened with wide eyes, then climbed into Grace's lap. "I do not remember much about the basement," she said quietly. "I remember it was dark and scary. I remember being hungry, but I also remember you, Mama Grace. I remember you singing to me when I was scared." Grace held her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I will always sing to you, baby. Always." Lucas was quieter, processing the information in his own way. After the conversation, he went to his room and did not come out for an hour. When he finally emerged, he walked straight to Marcus and hugged him. "I am not scared," Lucas said, his voice muffled against Marcus's chest, "because I have you and Mama Grace. The bad people cannot hurt us anymore." Marcus held his son, overwhelmed by the courage of this little boy who had endured so much. Lucas was right. They were stronger now. They had each other. And nothing Victor could do would ever change that. The appeal hearing took place 3 months later. Marcus and Grace attended every session, sitting in the courtroom and watching as Victor's lawyers tried to manipulate the truth. The new witnesses Victor had promised turned out to be unreliable. One was a former employee of the Wellington estate who had been fired for theft and had obvious reasons to lie. Another was a distant relative who had never even visited the house during the time the children were there. Grace took the stand again, her testimony as powerful as it had been during the original trial. She described the conditions in the basement, the chain around her wrist, the desperate efforts to keep the children fed and comforted with the meager resources available. She spoke about the fear and the isolation, about the nights when she thought she would die in that cold, dark place. The defense attorney tried to rattle her, suggesting that she had exaggerated her story for sympathy, that she was motivated by the money Marcus had given her. Grace remained calm and dignified, answering every question with clarity and honesty. "I did not stay in that basement for money," Grace said, looking directly at the judge. "I stayed because 2 innocent children needed someone to love them. I would do it again in a heartbeat." The appeals court ruled against Victor unanimously. The judges found that the original trial had been conducted fairly, that the evidence was overwhelming, and that the new witnesses were not credible. Victor's sentence would stand. He would remain in prison for the rest of his term. When the verdict was announced, Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was finally over. Victor had played his last card and lost. The family could move forward without the shadow of his brother hanging over them. That night, they celebrated with a special dinner at home. Grace made the children's favorite meal, and they ate together at the dining room table, talking and laughing like any ordinary family. Marcus looked around at the faces of the people he loved most in the world and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had almost lost everything. His grief had driven him away from his children, and his trust had been betrayed by his own brother. He had been a fool and a coward, running from his responsibilities when his children needed him most. But somehow, against all odds, he had been given a second chance. That second chance had a name: Grace. Without her, his children would not have survived. Without her courage, her sacrifice, her unwavering love, Lily and Lucas would have been lost forever. She had been their angel in that dark basement, their protector when no one else cared. And now she was his wife, his partner, the heart of their family. Marcus stood up from the table and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To Grace, the bravest woman I have ever known. You saved my children when I could not. You loved them when I was not there. You sacrificed your freedom to keep them safe. There are no words that can express how grateful I am. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to show you." Grace blushed, unused to being the center of attention even after all these years. "You already have," she said softly. "Every day you show me." Lily and Lucas jumped up from their seats, running to hug both their parents. The four of them stood together in the warm light of the dining room, arms wrapped around each other, a family forged not by blood, but by love and sacrifice. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Lily grew into a thoughtful young woman with a passion for writing. She kept a journal where she processed her feelings, and she dreamed of one day telling her story to help other children who had suffered like her. Lucas became interested in science and technology, building robots in the garage and talking about wanting to invent things that would help people. Grace continued her work as a child advocate, expanding her role to include policy work and speaking engagements. She testified before legislative committees, advocating for stronger protections for children and better training for social workers. Her story inspired others, showing that one person's courage could make a difference. Marcus found purpose in philanthropy, using his remaining wealth to fund organizations that helped abused children and survivors of trauma. He established a foundation in Sarah's name, honoring his first wife by supporting the causes she had cared about. He also created a scholarship fund for young people who had overcome adversity, giving them opportunities for education and growth. The Wellington name, once associated with scandal and tragedy, became synonymous with hope and redemption. People who heard their story were moved by the family's resilience, by the way they had transformed suffering into purpose. But the most important work happened quietly, within the walls of their modest home. It happened in bedtime stories and homework help, in family game nights and holiday traditions. It happened in the small moments of connection that built trust and love over time. Lily graduated from high school with honors, giving a speech at her ceremony about the importance of second chances. She talked about her early years without giving details, acknowledging that her start in life had been difficult, but that she had been blessed with a family who never gave up on her. In the audience, Marcus and Grace wept with pride. Lucas followed his sister 2 years later, receiving an award for his science project on renewable energy. In his acceptance speech, he thanked his parents for believing in him, for showing him that his past did not define his future. He looked out at the crowd and smiled, a confident young man with the world ahead of him. Grace and Marcus grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They watched their children go off to college, start careers, find partners of their own. They became grandparents, spoiling a new generation with the same love and attention they had given Lily and Lucas. Through it all, they never forgot where they had come from. The basement was always there, a reminder of the darkness that humans were capable of. But it was also a reminder of the light that could emerge from that darkness, the love that could grow from the most unlikely places. One evening, many years after everything had begun, Marcus sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset. Grace joined him, settling into the chair beside his. They held hands, as they had done countless times before, their fingers intertwined with the ease of long familiarity. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not come back that day?" Grace asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "Every day. It is the thing I am most grateful for in my entire life. Coming home, finding you and the children, being given the chance to make things right." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to wonder why this happened to us, why those children had to suffer, why I had to spend 2 years chained to a wall. I spent so long being angry at the world, at God, at fate. But now I understand." "What do you understand?" Grace looked up at him with those eyes that had seen so much pain and yet still held so much love. "Everything that happened led us to this moment, to this family, to this life we built together. I would not change a single thing, because changing anything might mean losing what we have now." Marcus kissed her forehead, overwhelmed by the wisdom and grace of this remarkable woman. She had taught him so much about courage, about forgiveness, about the transformative power of love. He had entered that basement as a broken man, and he had emerged as something new, someone capable of being the father and husband his family deserved. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere inside the house, their grandchildren were playing, their laughter echoing through the rooms. Life was full of noise and chaos and beautiful imperfection. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought them here, the tragedy of Sarah's death, the cowardice of running away, the horror of discovering his children in that basement, the slow, painful process of healing and rebuilding, the challenges and setbacks along the way, the victories, large and small, that had sustained them. It had not been an easy path, but looking back, he would not trade it for anything, because this path had led him to Grace, to his children, to the family he never knew he needed. He squeezed Grace's hand gently. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For everything. For saving my children. For loving me despite my failures. For giving me a reason to become a better man." Grace smiled. That warm and genuine smile that had comforted 2 frightened children in a dark basement so many years ago. "Thank you for coming back," she replied. "Thank you for fighting for us." They sat together as the stars emerged, 2 people who had found each other in the most impossible circumstances. The world continued to turn, bringing new days and new challenges, but whatever came next, they would face it together. Because that was what family did. That was what love did. It took the broken pieces of life and put them back together, creating something new and beautiful from the wreckage of the past. Marcus Wellington had lost everything once: his wife, his children, his sense of purpose. He had fallen into despair and run away from his responsibilities, but he had found his way back. He had discovered that it was never too late to do the right thing, never too late to become the person you were meant to be. And at the heart of that transformation was Grace, the nanny who became a prisoner, who became a protector, who became a mother, who became a wife. The woman who showed him that courage came in many forms, and that the greatest strength was the strength to love even when loving was painful. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real. It was hard-earned. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the redemptive power of love. And it was, finally, a story with a happy ending.